Hi, and welcome back to fleetmusic.blogspot.com. This is the first of a series of tutorials and video postings where I'll be looking at the stab in contemporary electronic music. There's a whole load of spiel that goes with this blog posting on my site, which is fleetmusic.blogspot.com, and so I'll save going to that now. This is definitely more the applied side of things. So the first thing we're going to do here is just to kind of recreate what I think I do a lot, and I'm sure what all you guys out there do as well, where you'll hear a sound, in this case a stab, and you think, oh, how do I recreate that? And here are just a few examples from MP3s that I brought from Beatport. The first one is a really simple one. It's let's play it. It's the track's called Broken Chords, and the artist is Nicola Gala. It's quite a nicely put together track. It's kind of quite generic, to be honest, but it's kind of well produced, as is most stuff that comes out on free range. And I think I brought it just because I quite like the arrangement and the sound design, rather than it being an outstanding track. So what we're going to try and do here is work out what chord is being played, and then actually recreate the actual stab sound itself. So what I've done here, I've looped up just a 1 bar, and what we're after here is that sound, that little stab you hear twice in this 1 bar measure. And if we very simply make sure that we're on 16 note divisions. Actually, I'm going to turn the volume down because it's quite horrible, but we're just going to bring in our loop braces and try and locate the stabs. So I know actually the first stab is actually on the second beat, and then the last stab in the measure is this guy here, which is very, very late. So it's in effect the 8th, 16th note in the measure, but it's actually very, very late. So it's almost 1/32 note was halfway, really. So, but it's a very late 16th note pattern. I'm sure they left it kind of late. It didn't tie things up just because it adds a nice little kind of swing to the loop. So here's our 1 bar loop. And then once you've isolated that sound, as I have here, this is the one that's not on top of the kick. So I've looped up, and there's a little bit of a shaker, but we can ignore that. So we're just going to, what I've done, I've dropped in an EQ3, so I can just zoom in on, focus in on the sound, and cut out any highs or lows that that might be there. And if I double click on our spectrum, and I pull down the low a bit, I can see, or I can begin to get a good idea of what chord is being played. So I would suggest the root is this B flat here. The next note in the chord is this C sharp 4. And although there's two peaks here which are very close together, let's just go with the first one, take it from there. So that's the F4. And let's see what that means in actual term, in real terms, really. And so I've already prepared that. I've actually already prepared it in the same sequence. So what we have here is our standard, I'm sure you guys probably already worked this out. What we have here is our standard minor chord. So the root note here, B flat, the C sharp, should I say, is the minor third relative to our root, and then here we have the perfect fifth. So yeah, your typical minor chords. If I stop that clip and hit play on this, we can hear my attempt at recreating that, which, admittedly isn't exactly right, but who cares really, because it's not really about nailing the sound exactly. It's more about kind of what you learn on the way to that sound, um, and also the kind of general lessons. In this case, I would say general lesson is that it's a very very simple sound, but it still provides. It still does its job really, and all we have here. I'll explain this briefly, but I'll go into it um, in greater length in a moment. But in the Instrument Rack here, we have some macro mappings I brought out. So depending on your MIDI setup, you can just play around with those. Pretty self-explanatory. I mean, it's a very simple sound, so I didn't need to kind of go overkill on any of the mappings that I made. What we have here, we have two chains within a rack, and the key thing is here through the mapping, I've just kind of designed a way in which we can play with the wideness of the sound just by panning the two different chains in the opposite direction to one another in a proportional manner. So let's dive into the sound actually. So I've called this one let me delete all this. I've called this sound sine stab, for the simple reason that is really just a simple sine stab. So then first move we're going to do, I'm going to leave the reverb there but turn it off for the moment. I'm going to go into devices and pull in the old trusty operator, hit return. It's going to drop it down there. I'm going to close that so I can actually see what I'm doing. I'm just going to, obviously in this loop, in the MIDI clip we have our loop, so the first stab on the second beat of the measure, and then we have this late second stab just before the third beat of the measure. Okay, so let's fire that off. And again, just the benefit of analysis using your spectrum is that you know where the root note is, you know where to place where to play along your keyboard. So yeah, here we've just got a simple sine. So what we're going to, the first move, as always really, is is just to sort out the envelopes or envelope. So a stab, we're going to have a fairly immediate attack invariably, and a short decay phase. So we're just going to leave it at decay at 600 milliseconds, and just pull the sustain right down. We may go on to adjust that slightly. What I'm going to do now is actually use a bit of FM. Actually, a lot of the examples that I'm going to be going through later don't use any FM at all, but this is just, I'm going to use a really small amount of FM. I'm also going to right click in the shell of oscillator B and then go to copy envelope from oscillator A, and magically it's brought oscillator A's envelope through. I've selected a saw 3 which has 3 harmonics, so it's not too bright a saw. In fact, as saws go, it's pretty dull, but that's what we need. So I'm just going to, from listening to that sound, I decided that I needed a bit of interest lower down, and through trial and error I arrived at these settings. So I brought the chorus setting down to 0.5, which basically means it's playing the octave below. And if I bring the level up, we'll start to hear that sound come through. And it's going to sound, really only want a small amount, and it's going to sound quite metallic. But it's going to add a little bit of depth to, admittedly, a very, very simple sound. I'm actually going to shorten the decay even more, and then bring up the time, because I know I'm probably going to map the time to our macros later. Again, the level of oscillator B we can really decrease or increase to taste really. what I'm going to do now is bring in a simple low pass filter, 12 dB filter. I'm not going to use any envelope, although all later examples, or most of the later examples will use envelope, which is kind of quite key to a lot of stab sounds. I'm going to just find an appropriate point, really, to roll off those higher harmonics in that sound. And bring up the spread a bit. So be careful with that, because I often find that by taking the spread up to 100, you kind of hollow out the sound sometimes, but it sounds okay. And the last step is actually to use the is to use the pitch envelope, and just a tiny little kind of click. So we're going to bring the decay. Actually, we're going to map the decay. So let's do that now. So we're just going to select it, group it up, and we're going to map the overall amount of the pitch envelope to a macro. We're going to change that to 0. We're going to change the minimum down to 0, should I say. So we don't get any bad things happening. We're going to whack up to 100 just for the meantime, and we're going to map that decay to macro 2. And so it's going to give us a little click, which is going to help, well, that I can hear in this sound in the example, and it's going to help it ever so slightly sit in the mix. And that's it, really. What we're going to do now, I'm just going to drag over the reverb from last time. We'll just copy it over. Chuck that in after that. And bring down the dry wet. So there's no filtering of the input, no reflections. I messed around a bit with the diffusion network, but it's a very short. Look at the decay time. Very short, simple reverb. This is going to add a kind of breathy quality to the sound. And the next and the final step is, now that we've made those macro mappings, we can then just duplicate that up. And I'm going to map this to macro 3, and I'm going to map the pan of the second chain to macro 3 as well. And then I'm going to go in there, and I'm going to set this one's going to be going left, or right, and this one is going to go from the center, i.e. 0, all the way to the wide left. So if we follow here, we can see that effect. And it might be a good idea just to bring down the overall level of the sound slightly, so avoiding any clipping. So yeah, now let's just trigger that off at the same time as a 1-bar loop. It doesn't sound too bad. I mean, you can kind of... This is R1. And this is original. Yeah, so that's the first tutorial. Join me for lots more. Cheers.